You want to play chess with us? The blonde woman's laughter echoed through the marble hallway. Boy, do you even know which piece is the king? The 12-year-old stood his ground, his small hands clenched with quiet determination. I'll make you a deal. When I win, you double my mama's salary. When you win? The Grandmaster leaned back, his championship ring catching the light. Listen here, kid. I've defeated world champions. What makes you think? Because, the boy interrupted, his voice steady as steel, you've never played someone with nothing left to lose. What happened next in that luxurious Manhattan penthouse would become the most talked about chess match in the city's elite circles. A single mother's job hung in the balance, a grandmaster's reputation was on the line, and a young boy was about to teach everyone in that room a lesson they'd never forget. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Williams had learned to be invisible long before his 12th birthday. It was a skill every child of a domestic worker perfected, walking silently through marble hallways, breathing quietly in rooms filled with crystal chandeliers, existing in spaces where your presence was tolerated but never welcomed. His mother, Diane, had been working for the Henderson family for 3 years, and in all that time, Marcus had become an expert at disappearing into corners, behind doors, into the shadows of their Fifth Avenue penthouse. The Hendersons' home was the kind of place Marcus only saw in movies before his mother got this job. 20-foot ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, and furniture that cost more than most people's cars. Mrs. Victoria Henderson, a 55-year-old woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a collection of tennis bracelets that could fund a small school, ran the household with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. She had rules for everything: how the towels should be folded, which direction the carpet fibers should face after vacuuming, and most importantly, that helps children should neither be seen nor heard. But today was different. Today was Saturday, and Mr. Henderson was away on business, which meant Mrs. Henderson's brother, Richard Kellerman, was visiting. Marcus had heard the name whispered in hushed, reverent tones. Richard Kellerman, the chess grandmaster who'd won his first national championship at 15 and had gone on to dominate the international circuit for 2 decades. The man who'd written 3 best-selling books on chess strategy and had been featured on the cover of Chess Life magazine more times than anyone could count. Marcus pressed himself against the wall outside the study, watching through the crack in the door. The room was bathed in afternoon sunlight, dust motes dancing in the golden rays that illuminated the mahogany chess set positioned between Mrs. Henderson and her brother. The pieces weren't just pieces, they were hand-carved ivory and ebony, each one a small work of art that probably cost more than his mother made in a month. "You're getting better, Victoria," Richard said, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from decades of victory. "But you still telegraph your moves 3 turns in advance." Mrs. Henderson laughed, a tinkling sound like champagne glasses clinking. "Not all of us can be world champions, Richard. Some of us have actual businesses to run." Marcus found himself leaning closer, his eyes tracking every move on the board. He recognized the opening, the Queen's Gambit, followed by the Carlsbad variation. His fingers twitched involuntarily, mirroring the movements he would make if he were playing. Richard was setting a trap, 5 moves ahead, and Mrs. Henderson was walking right into it. "Marcus!" His mother's whispered voice made him jump. Diane stood at the end of the hallway, her uniform pristine despite having been working since 6 that morning. "What are you doing? You know you're not supposed to be in this part of the house." "I'm sorry, Mama," Marcus whispered back, but his eyes kept drifting to the study. "They're playing the Carlsbad variation wrong. Black should push the c-pawn to prevent." "Marcus Williams, you get away from there right now," Diane said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet urgency that meant serious trouble. "If Mrs. Henderson sees you." But it was too late. The study door swung open, and Mrs. Henderson stood there, her blue eyes cold as winter frost. "Diane, I thought I made it clear that your son was to remain in the kitchen area when you brought him here. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson, Diane said, immediately moving to grab Marcus's arm. He just wandered off for a moment. It won't happen again. Mrs. Henderson's gaze shifted to Marcus, and he saw something flicker in her eyes, annoyance, disgust, maybe both. Children who don't know their place grow up to be adults who don't know their place, she said, her words directed at Diane but her eyes still fixed on Marcus. Richard appeared behind his sister, towering at 6 feet tall with silver hair that gave him a distinguished air. His eyes were different from his sister's, curious rather than cold. What's all the commotion? Nothing important, Mrs. Henderson said, already turning away. Just establishing boundaries. But Marcus, in a moment of courage or foolishness he couldn't quite identify, spoke up. You're going to lose in 7 moves. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Henderson turned slowly, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising toward her hairline. Richard's eyes sharpened with interest. Diane's grip on Marcus's arm tightened to the point of pain. I beg your pardon. Mrs. Henderson's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus swallowed hard but didn't back down. Your position. You're going to lose in 7 moves. The bishop's sacrifice is coming, and you haven't prepared your king's defense. Richard let out a low whistle. The boy knows chess. The boy knows his place, Mrs. Henderson said sharply. Which is not here, commenting on matters he couldn't possibly understand. Actually, Richard said, studying Marcus with new interest, he's right. I was planning a bishop's sacrifice in exactly 7 moves. How did you know that, young man? Marcus felt his mother's hand trembling on his arm. He knew he should stay quiet, should apologize and disappear back into invisibility. But something about the way Mrs. Henderson looked at him, like he was less than human, like his thoughts and observations couldn't possibly matter, made him stand straighter. The pawn structure gives it away, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. Plus, you've been setting up the same pattern since move 12. It's from your game against Petrosian in 1987, except he saw it coming and countered with knight to f6. The room went silent again. Richard's mouth had fallen slightly open. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone from pale to slightly red. And Diane looked like she might faint. You've studied my games? Richard asked, his voice filled with genuine amazement. I've studied everyone's games, Marcus replied simply. Chess is chess, no matter who's playing. Mrs. Henderson laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Oh, this is rich. The maid's boy thinks he understands chess because he's watched a few YouTube videos. Victoria, Richard said, a note of warning in his voice. What? Are we supposed to pretend this child has any real understanding of the game? His mother can barely read the cleaning instructions I leave her. Marcus felt something hot and angry rise in his chest. His mother worked 14-hour days, spoke 3 languages, and had a degree from Howard University that she couldn't use because she needed immediate work when they'd moved to New York. But Mrs. Henderson didn't know any of that, and wouldn't care if she did. I can play, Marcus said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I can beat you. This time, Mrs. Henderson's laughter was genuine, filling the room with its mocking tone. You beat me? Child, I've been playing chess since before your mother was born. Then you shouldn't be afraid to play me, Marcus said, meeting her gaze directly. Richard was grinning now, clearly enjoying the unexpected turn of events. The boy has a point, Victoria. I'm not playing chess with the help's child, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with disdain. It's inappropriate and ridiculous. Marcus felt his mother tugging at his arm, trying to pull him away, but he stood firm. What if we make it interesting? Marcus, no, Diane whispered urgently. But Mrs. Henderson had already turned back, her curiosity piqued despite herself. Interesting how? If I win, Marcus said, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, you double my mother's salary. The silence that followed was different from before. This was the silence of disbelief, of boundaries being crossed, of unspoken rules being shattered. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone from red to purple. Richard was no longer smiling. And Diane had stopped breathing altogether. "You insolent little," Mrs. Henderson began, but Richard held up a hand. "Let him finish," Richard said, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "What if you lose?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew what he was risking, knew what it would mean for his mother, for their life, for everything. But he also knew something else, he knew he could win. "If I lose," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him, "my mother loses her job." "No." Diane finally found her voice. "Mrs. Henderson, please, he doesn't know what he's saying. He's just a child. I'll take him home right now, and we can forget this ever happened." But Mrs. Henderson was smiling now, and it was the kind of smile that made Marcus think of sharks in nature documentaries. "No, Diane. Your son seems very confident. And he's right, I'm not afraid to play a 12-year-old child." She turned to Marcus. "You have a deal, boy. One game. Standard time controls. And when you lose, and you will lose, your mother will be looking for new employment by Monday morning." "Victoria, this is cruel, even for you," Richard said, frowning. "Cruel?" "The boy challenged me. He set the terms. I'm simply accepting." She moved back toward the chess table. "Unless he wants to admit he's all talk and no substance. That would be the smart move, wouldn't it, Marcus? To admit you're in over your head." Marcus looked at his mother's terrified face, at Richard's concerned expression, at Mrs. Henderson's triumphant smirk. He thought about all the times he'd watched from doorways, all the times he'd been told to be quiet, to be invisible, to know his place. He thought about his mother coming home exhausted every night, her feet swollen, her back aching, counting every dollar to make sure they could afford rent and groceries. "Set up the board," Marcus said, walking toward the table. "I'll take black." The study transformed into an arena. Richard Kellerman himself arranged the pieces with the reverence of a priest preparing communion, each carved figure positioned with mathematical precision on its starting square. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the board that seemed to divide it between light and darkness, a fitting metaphor, Marcus thought, for what was about to happen. Mrs. Henderson settled into her chair with the confidence of someone who'd already won. She adjusted her tennis bracelet, smoothed her cream-colored blazer, and looked at Marcus the way one might look at an insect before crushing it. "I hope you understand what you've done, boy. Your foolish pride has cost your mother her livelihood." "Victoria, please," Diane said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood frozen by the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "He's just a child. This isn't fair." "Fair?" Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "Your son made a wager. I accepted. That's perfectly fair. Perhaps this will teach him a valuable lesson about knowing one's station in life." Richard pulled up a chair beside the table, positioning himself as arbiter. His expression was unreadable, but Marcus noticed how his eyes kept moving between the board and Marcus's face, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Standard tournament rules apply," he announced, though his voice lacked its earlier warmth. "Touch move is in effect. No take-backs. 50-move rule for draws. Victoria, you have white." Marcus sat down in the leather chair opposite Mrs. Henderson. His feet didn't quite reach the floor, and the chess pieces looked enormous in his small hands. But as he settled in, something changed in his posture. The nervous 12-year-old boy seemed to fade away, replaced by someone who'd spent thousands of hours in this exact position, though usually on a plastic board in the public library, not in a Manhattan penthouse. "Before we begin," Mrs. Henderson said, her fingers hovering over her king's pawn, "I want you to understand something, Marcus. I've been playing competitive chess for 40 years. I was women's state champion 3 times in Connecticut. I've studied under international masters. What makes you think, a child who learned chess from, what, phone apps, that you can compete at this level? Marcus met her gaze steadily. My father taught me. The words hung in the air. It was the first time he'd mentioned his father in months, and he saw his mother flinch in his peripheral vision. Mrs. Henderson, of course, didn't notice or care about the weight of that admission. Well then, she said with a dismissive laugh, I'm sure your father would be very proud to watch you fail so spectacularly. She pushed her king's pawn forward 2 squares, e4, the king's pawn opening, the most common first move in chess. Marcus responded instantly, his hand moving with practiced precision, c5, the Sicilian defense. It was the most popular defense against e4 at the Grandmaster level, a sharp, aggressive response that immediately announced his intentions. This wasn't going to be a quiet game. Richard leaned forward slightly. The Sicilian. Interesting choice. Mrs. Henderson played nf3, developing her knight. Marcus responded with d6. She pushed her queen's pawn to d4, and Marcus captured it with his c-pawn. The standard exchange in the open Sicilian. Move after move, they followed the well-worn paths of chess theory, but Marcus could see Mrs. Henderson's confidence growing with each piece she developed. You know, she said, castling kingside, your mother is an adequate employee. Not exceptional, but adequate. It's a shame she'll have to find work elsewhere because of your arrogance. Victoria, Richard warned. What? We're having a conversation. The boy wanted to play with adults, he should be prepared for adult conversation. She developed her bishop to e3. Tell me, Marcus, what will you tell your mother when she can't pay rent next month? When you're evicted because you wanted to show off. Marcus's hand hesitated for just a moment over his knight. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were possible. If he lost, if he'd miscalculated, if his pride had indeed cost them everything. Focus on the game, Richard said quietly, and Marcus wasn't sure if he was talking to him or his sister. Marcus moved his knight to f6, developing toward the center. The position was still theoretical, still safe, but he knew that would change soon. Mrs. Henderson was playing the English attack, an aggressive system designed to storm Black's kingside. It was a good choice against the Najorf variation of the Sicilian, which Marcus was playing. But it was also predictable. You know what I find amusing? Mrs. Henderson said, pushing her f-pawn forward. Your mother went to Howard University. Did you know that, Richard? A college degree, and she's cleaning my toilets. That's what happens when people don't understand their limitations. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, but he channeled it into focus. His mother had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biochemistry. She'd been accepted to medical school but couldn't afford it after Marcus's father died. She'd taken this job because it paid immediately, because it sometimes let her bring Marcus when she couldn't afford childcare, because survival demanded sacrifices that people like Mrs. Henderson would never understand. He played b7, developing his bishop and preparing to castle. The game was entering the middle phase now, where preparation gave way to calculation, where one mistake could cascade into defeat. Mrs. Henderson launched her attack with g4, thrusting her pawn forward like a spear toward his kingside. It was aggressive, perhaps overly so. Marcus castled queenside, sending his king to relative safety on the opposite wing. Now the battle lines were drawn, she would attack his queenside, he would counter on the kingside, and whoever broke through first would likely win. Opposite side castling, Richard murmured. That's brave. That's stupid, Mrs. Henderson corrected, pushing her g-pawn forward again. He's given me a clear target. But Marcus saw something she didn't. Her aggressive pawn pushes had created weaknesses in her own position, small cracks that could be exploited. He played h6, a quiet move that prepared his own pawn storm while preventing her pieces from using the g5 square. The game continued, move after move, the position growing sharper with each exchange. Mrs. Henderson's attack looked dangerous, her pawns advancing like an avalanche toward his king, but Marcus had calculated deeper. He sacrificed a pawn on the king side to open lines for his rooks. He maneuvered his knights to optimal squares. He waited. "Your position is crumbling," Mrs. Henderson said, though Marcus heard a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. She could see that despite her material advantage, his pieces were becoming dangerously active. Then Marcus played N5, centralizing his knight and threatening multiple tactics. Mrs. Henderson paused, really paused, for the first time. Her hand hovered over her bishop as she calculated. 1 minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. "Take your time," Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. It wasn't mockery, it was the same thing she'd said to him earlier, returned without malice but with perfect timing. She moved her bishop to d2, defending. It was solid, but it was also passive. Marcus played rc8, increasing the pressure. The tide was turning, and everyone in the room could feel it. "This is impossible," Mrs. Henderson muttered, her composed facade beginning to crack. "You're just a child." "Chess doesn't care how old you are," Marcus replied, sliding his rook to c2. The move invaded her second rank, and suddenly her king looked very vulnerable. Mrs. Henderson's next move was a mistake. Not a blunder, not yet, but a small inaccuracy born from frustration and disbelief. She pushed her h-pawn, trying to create her own attack, but it was too slow. Marcus's pieces were already swarming her position like antibodies attacking an infection. Richard was leaning forward now, his experienced eyes reading the position like a book. "Victoria," he said softly, "you need to defend." "I know what I'm doing," she snapped, but her hand trembled slightly as she moved her queen to f2, trying to hold everything together. Marcus played nb4, and the knight landed on the square like a judge's gavel. It attacked her bishop, threatened to jump to d3 with devastating effect, and coordinated perfectly with his other pieces. The position was now objectively winning for black, though it would take perfect technique to convert the advantage. Mrs. Henderson stared at the board, her face flushing red. She could see it now, the coordination of his pieces, the harmony of his position, the inevitability of defeat creeping toward her like a shadow. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "You must be cheating somehow. Richard, he has to be cheating." "He's not cheating," Richard said quietly. "He's outplaying you." The words seemed to physically strike Mrs. Henderson. She looked at her brother in betrayal, then back at the board, then at Marcus. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely lost. "Where did you really learn to play?" she asked, her voice smaller now. Marcus moved his rook to the 7th rank before answering. "My father was William Marcus Williams. You might not know the name, but he was one of the strongest players in Detroit. Never got the title he deserved because..." He paused, glancing at his mother. "Because the chess world wasn't always welcoming to people who looked like him. But he taught me everything. Every opening, every endgame, every principle. He used to say that chess was the only place where a black king could stand equal to a white one." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Mrs. Henderson's position was deteriorating with each move. Her king was exposed, her pieces uncoordinated, her pawns weak. But more than that, her certainty, her absolute conviction that she was superior simply by virtue of who she was crumbling like a fortress built on sand. She played qd2, trying to trade queens and simplify the position. Marcus avoided the trade with qb6, maintaining pressure and threatening the b2 pawn. Her king was running out of safe squares. "I'll pay you," she said suddenly, desperately. "Whatever you want. Just agree to a draw." "Victoria!" Richard exclaimed, genuinely shocked. Marcus looked at her steadily. "You wouldn't offer a draw to an equal. Why would I accept one from you?" He played n3+, and the check forced her king to move. She went to d1, the only legal square. Marcus's queen swooped to b1+, another check. The king shuffled to e2, and Marcus's knight jumped to f4+, a discovered check from the rook that also attacked her queen. It was a massacre disguised as a chess game. Move by move, piece by piece, Marcus dismantled her position with the precision of a surgeon and the artistry of a composer. His pieces danced across the board in perfect coordination, each move building on the last, creating a symphony of destruction that was as beautiful as it was devastating. Mrs. Henderson's king stumbled across the board like a drunk man trying to find his way home. Every square seemed to hold a new threat, every move led to another check, another forced retreat. The woman who'd entered this game with absolute certainty was now gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her breathing shallow. King to d1, she said, her voice barely audible. The regal confidence had evaporated, replaced by something Marcus had never seen in her before, fear. Marcus didn't hesitate. His hand moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd played this position 1,000 times in his mind. Knight to e2, check. The knight landed on the square with a soft click that seemed to echo through the study. Richard whistled low under his breath. A smothered mate pattern developing. Victoria, you need to. I can see it, she snapped, but her hand hovered uncertainly over her king. The problem wasn't seeing it, it was accepting it. Accepting that this 12-year-old boy, this child of her maid, was orchestrating her destruction with the casual efficiency of a grandmaster. She moved her king to c1, the only legal move. Marcus's queen slid to d1, delivering another check. The king shuffled to b2, and Marcus's rook swooped to c2, yet another check. This is called a king hunt, Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving the board. My father showed me my first one when I was 6. He said the key isn't just to chase the king, it's to chase it to exactly where you want it to go. Diane had moved closer to the table, drawn by the magnetism of the moment. She'd never seen her son like this, so focused, so confident, so completely in command. This wasn't the boy who helped her fold laundry or did homework at the kitchen table. This was someone else entirely, someone who'd inherited more from his father than just his eyes. Mrs. Henderson's king went to a3, forced to the edge of the board. Marcus's queen pursued relentlessly, qa1, check. The king to b4, trying to escape up the board, but Marcus's pieces were waiting. Knight to c3, cutting off escape squares. The net was tightening. You could resign, Richard suggested gently to his sister. There's no shame in, I don't resign to children, Mrs. Henderson spat, though her hand shook as she moved her king to a5. Marcus looked up from the board for the first time in several moves, meeting her eyes directly. You're not resigning to a child. You're resigning to chess. The game doesn't care who's playing it, it only cares who plays it better. He played qb2, a quiet move that prepared the final combination. Mrs. Henderson stared at the board, calculating desperately, but every variation led to the same conclusion. Her pieces were too far away to help their king. Her pawns were blocked or useless. Her entire position had become a beautiful grave she'd dug for herself. Do you know what you've done? She asked, but she wasn't talking to Marcus anymore. She was talking to the board, to the pieces that had betrayed her, to the universe that had allowed this impossibility to occur. Do you have any idea what this means? It means, Marcus said softly, moving his rook to a2, that you're about to learn what my father learned, what I learned, what my mother learns every single day, that dignity isn't about position. It's about how you carry yourself when your position changes. Mrs. Henderson's next move was born of desperation, king to a4. She knew it was hopeless, but pride demanded she play until the very end. Marcus's queen moved to b4, delivering check and forcing the king back to a5. In 2 moves, it's checkmate, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of mathematical truth. Your king goes to a6, my queen to b6 is checkmate. Or your king goes back to a4, and my knight to b6 is also checkmate. There's no escape. The room fell into a silence so complete that Marcus could hear his mother's heartbeat from across the room. Or maybe that was his own, thundering in his chest as the magnitude of what he'd done began to sink in. Mrs. Henderson stared at the board, her face cycling through emotions like a kaleidoscope: disbelief, anger, humiliation, and finally, something that looked almost like grief. Her hand reached for her king, picked it up, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might throw it. Instead, she set it gently on its side, the universal sign of resignation. "I resign," she whispered. Richard leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath he might have been holding for the entire game. "That was extraordinary. Marcus, that endgame technique, where did you learn to play like that?" But before Marcus could answer, Mrs. Henderson stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is impossible. He must have cheated. There's no way a 12-year-old, especially not," she caught herself, but everyone knew what she'd been about to say. "Especially not what?" Diane asked, speaking for the first time since the game began. Her voice was quiet but carried an edge Marcus had rarely heard. "Especially not a black child? Especially not the son of your maid?" "That's not what Mrs. Henderson began, but Richard cut her off. "Victoria, stop. You lost. The boy played a brilliant game, and you lost. Accept it with grace, or at least with dignity." Mrs. Henderson whirled on her brother. "You don't understand. I can't have lost too. This is social suicide. If anyone finds out," Richard said, standing to his full height, "they'll know that you were beaten by a chess prodigy. There's no shame in that. But there is shame in how you're handling it." Marcus stood up from the table, his legs slightly shaky from sitting still for so long. "Mrs. Henderson, we made a deal. My mother's salary." Yes, Mrs. Henderson said, waving her hand dismissively while avoiding eye contact. "The deal. Your mother's salary will be doubled." The word seemed to physically pain her to say. Diane gasped softly. Doubling her salary would mean they could move to a better apartment, could maybe even start saving for college, could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I want it in writing," he said, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "And I want it to start this month." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flashed with anger. "You presumptuous little—" "He's right," Richard interrupted. "A deal is a deal, Victoria. And frankly, after that performance, I'm tempted to sponsor the boy myself. Marcus, have you ever played in tournaments?" Marcus shook his head. "They cost money. Entry fees, travel, hotels. We couldn't afford it." Richard pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. He walked over to Marcus and handed it to him. "I run a chess academy in the city. Full scholarship for students who show exceptional promise. You've more than qualified today." Marcus took the card with trembling fingers, reading the gold-embossed text, "Kellerman Chess Academy, where future masters are made." "Richard, you can't be serious," Mrs. Henderson protested. "You're going to train the maid's son?" "I'm going to train a chess prodigy," Richard corrected. "And frankly, Victoria, after what I just witnessed, I'm wondering if he should be training me. That rook and knight coordination in the endgame, I've seen grandmasters with less precision." He turned to Diane. "Your son has a gift, Mrs. Williams. A rare, extraordinary gift. With proper training, he could compete at the national level, maybe even internationally." Diane's eyes filled with tears. His father would have been so proud. He always said Marcus was special, but after he died, I couldn't afford to keep up the lessons, and I thought, "Well, now you can afford it," Richard said firmly, shooting a meaningful look at his sister. "With your doubled salary and a full scholarship to my academy, Marcus will have every opportunity to develop his talent." Mrs. Henderson had retreated to the window, staring out at Central Park as if the trees might offer her some comfort or explanation for what had just happened. "This is a disaster," she muttered. "When the club hears about this, they'll hear that you discovered and supported a chess prodigy," Richard said smoothly. "Think about it, Victoria. You could be known as the patron who helped launch the career of America's next chess champion. That's the story you should be telling. For the first time since her defeat, Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted to something calculating. Marcus could practically see her reframing the narrative in her mind, transforming from humiliated victim to benevolent benefactor. It was almost impressive, the mental gymnastics required to maintain her self-image. Yes, she said slowly, turning back to face them. Yes, I suppose that's true. I did recognize the boy's talent, after all. That's why I agreed to play him. Marcus and his mother exchanged glances, but neither contradicted her revisionist history. They'd gotten what they came for, more than they'd dreamed possible. There is one more thing, Marcus said, and everyone turned to look at him. I want an apology. The room went cold. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed deep red. I beg your pardon. You insulted my mother. You said she could barely read the cleaning instructions you leave. That was cruel and untrue. She deserves an apology. Marcus, Diane said softly, it's okay. We don't need. Yes, we do, Marcus said firmly. She disrespected you, Mama. That's not okay, no matter how much money she has or how big her house is. Mrs. Henderson looked like she might explode. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Finally, Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. He's right, Victoria. You owe Mrs. Williams an apology. For a moment, Marcus thought Mrs. Henderson might actually refuse, might throw them out despite losing the bet, might let her pride cost her everything. But then, through gritted teeth and with visible effort, she turned to Diane. I apologize for my earlier comments. They were inappropriate. It wasn't much of an apology, but Diane nodded graciously. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Now, Mrs. Henderson said, clearly desperate to end this humiliation, if you'll all excuse me, I have a headache. Richard, please see them out. She swept from the room, her heels clicking against the floor in rapid staccato, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and the chessboard with her toppled king. Richard Kellerman stood in the study for a long moment after his sister left, staring at the chessboard as if it held secrets he was still trying to decode. The afternoon sun had shifted again, painting golden squares across the wooden pieces, and Marcus thought the defeated white king looked somehow smaller in this light, less imposing than it had seemed at the start of the game. Sit, Richard said suddenly, gesturing to the chair Marcus had just vacated. Both of you, please sit. Diane hesitated, a lifetime of training telling her that the help didn't sit in the good chairs, didn't linger in the master's study, didn't exist in these spaces as anything more than invisible hands that cleaned and served. But Richard's expression was earnest, almost urgent, and slowly, she lowered herself into the chair her son had just used to destroy Mrs. Henderson's certainty. Richard pulled over another chair, forming a triangle around the chessboard. He picked up the fallen white king, examining it as if seeing it for the first time. Do you know what I just witnessed? He asked, though it wasn't clear if he was addressing Marcus, Diane, or himself. A chess game? Marcus offered, though he sensed Richard meant something more. No, Richard said, setting the king upright in the center of the board. I witnessed a 12-year-old boy play the Najorf variation at a level that most international masters would envy. I witnessed endgame technique that takes decades to develop. I witnessed. He paused, looking directly at Marcus. I witnessed something that shouldn't be possible. My son has always been gifted, Diane said defensively, mistaking Richard's tone for accusation. Gifted doesn't explain this, Richard said, but his voice was filled with wonder, not suspicion. Mrs. Williams, I've been playing chess professionally for 42 years. I've trained hundreds of students. I've seen prodigies and pretenders, naturals and workers. Your son isn't just gifted, he's extraordinary. He began resetting the pieces to their starting positions, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus, play me. Richard, Mr. Kellerman, Diane started, hasn't he been through enough today? This isn't a challenge, Richard said quickly. I'm not my sister. I don't need to prove anything. I need to understand something. Please, Marcus. One game. No stakes, no pressure. Just chess. Marcus looked at his mother, who seemed torn between pride and protectiveness. Finally, she nodded slightly, and Marcus turned back to the board. You're a Grandmaster. You're just the boy who executed a king hunt that would make Mikhail Tal proud, Richard interrupted. Please. Indulge an old chess player's curiosity. Marcus took the black pieces again, and Richard opened with d4, the queen's pawn, a different opening system entirely. Marcus responded with nf6, the king's Indian defense, showing his versatility. But this game was different from the one with Mrs. Henderson. Richard played with a fluidity that made his moves seem effortless, each piece flowing to its optimal square like water finding its level. They played in silence for the first 10 moves, the only sound the soft click of pieces and the distant hum of New York traffic far below. Richard's style was nothing like his sister's, where she had been aggressive but crude, he was subtle but profound. Each move contained multiple ideas, multiple threats, multiple purposes. Your father, Richard said suddenly, not looking up from the board, William Marcus Williams. I knew of him. Marcus's hand froze over his bishop. You did? He played in the 1995 National Open. I was there as a commentator. He finished 9th out of 400 players, the highest placing amateur in the field. Richard moved his knight to e5, occupying the center. He should have been invited to more tournaments after that performance, but he trailed off, the unspoken reality hanging in the air. But he was black, Marcus finished quietly, completing his development with b7. The chess world likes to think it's a meritocracy, Richard said, castling queenside. That the board doesn't see color, only skill. But the board isn't the problem, it's the people around it. Your father was one of the best players I'd ever seen who never got the chances he deserved. Marcus castled kingside, and the game entered a complex middle game. Richard's pieces probed at his position like a doctor examining a patient, testing weaknesses, applying pressure without overcommitting. It was chess at a different level, and Marcus found himself having to calculate deeper, think harder, find resources he didn't know he had. He used to bring me to the library, Marcus said, maneuvering his knight toward the center. Every Saturday morning. We'd go through master games on the old computers, and he'd quiz me on positions. He said chess was the one place where what mattered wasn't who your parents were or how much money you had or what you looked like. Just how well you could think. Richard nodded, pushing his h-pawn forward to create attacking chances. He was right and wrong. On the board, that's absolutely true. But chess doesn't exist in a vacuum. Tournaments cost money. Training costs money. Time to study costs money. The opportunity to play costs more than most people realize. The position on the board had become incredibly sharp. Richard had sacrificed a pawn for initiative, and Marcus was defending accurately but under severe pressure. This was chess at its purest, two minds locked in combat, each trying to outcalculate, outmaneuver, outthink the other. Why did you stop playing? Richard asked suddenly. After your father died, why did you stop competing? Marcus was quiet for several moves, the question hanging between them like a suspended piece. Finally, as he moved his rook to d8, he answered. We couldn't afford it. Mom was working 3 jobs just to keep our apartment. Chess became. He searched for the words. Chess became something that reminded us of what we'd lost, not what we could still have. Diane made a small sound, something between a sob and a sigh. Marcus, I'm so sorry. If I could have found a way. It's not your fault, Mama, Marcus said firmly, then looked at Richard. She sold everything she could to pay for Dad's medical bills. Everything except his chess set. She kept that for me, even when we needed food. Richard's next move was quiet but deadly, QB3, putting pressure on multiple points simultaneously. Marcus studied the position, seeing the threats, calculating defenses. He was worse, definitely worse, but not lost. Not yet. Your mother made the right choice, Richard said. Chess sets can be replaced. The love that makes someone keep a chess set when they need food, that's irreplaceable. They played on, the position becoming increasingly complex. Marcus found a tactical shot that won back the pawn, but Richard maintained positional pressure. It was like trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands, possible for a moment, maybe two, but ultimately futile. You're going to win, Marcus said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. He could see it now, 15 moves into the future. Richard's pieces would coordinate in a final assault that his defenses couldn't withstand. Yes, Richard agreed simply. But you're making me work for it harder than most masters would. How many games have you played? Thousands online. Maybe 10,000. More, possibly. After Dad died, when Mom was at work, I'd play on the library computers. Free chess servers, no entry fees, just chess. Marcus moved his queen to e7, setting up a defensive formation. I played under usernames no one would remember. Won games no one celebrated. Lost games no one cared about. Richard paused, his hand hovering over his bishop. And no one knew how strong you'd become. No one asked, Marcus said simply. The game continued for another 20 moves, Richard's advantage slowly crystallizing into a winning position. But he didn't rush, didn't showboat, didn't humiliate. He played with respect, acknowledging Marcus's best moves with small nods, taking time to consider even when the position was clearly won. Finally, Marcus's king stood alone against Richard's remaining pieces, a queen, rook, and 2 pawns. Marcus could have played on, could have made Richard prove the elementary checkmate, but he'd learned from his father that there was dignity in knowing when to resign. I resign, Marcus said, tipping his king. Good game. Great game, Richard corrected. He stood up and walked to a mahogany cabinet in the corner of the study. From it, he withdrew a wooden box, old but well maintained. I want to show you something. He opened the box, revealing a chess set unlike any Marcus had ever seen. The pieces were hand-carved from ivory and ebony, but it was the craftsmanship that took his breath away. Each piece was a work of art, the knights were actual horses with flowing manes, the rooks were detailed castles with individual stones, the kings and queens wore expressions of nobility and wisdom. This belonged to José Raúl Capablanca, Richard said, his voice reverent. The third official world chess champion. He gave it to my grandfather after a tournament in 1941, a year before he died. It's worth more than most people's cars. Marcus stared at the set, afraid to even breathe near it. It's beautiful. It's yours. The words hung in the air like an impossible equation. Diane gasped. Marcus looked up at Richard, certain he'd misheard. I can't, that's too much, we couldn't possibly, Diane stammered. Mrs. Williams, Richard said, his tone gentle but firm, your son just played a game against a grandmaster that would make masters proud. More than that, he did it after already playing a crucial game under enormous pressure. That's not just talent, that's character. He closed the box and placed it in Marcus's trembling hands. Your father would want you to have a proper set. And Capablanca, who came from nothing to become world champion, would appreciate it ending up with someone who understands that chess is more than just a game, it's a language that speaks across every barrier humans create. Marcus clutched the box like it might disappear if he loosened his grip. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to my academy. Say you'll work harder than you've ever worked. Say you'll honor your father's memory by becoming the player he never got the chance to be. Yes, Marcus said immediately. Yes to all of it. Richard smiled, then turned to Diane. Your son is going to need support. Not just financial, emotional, practical. The path to mastery is brutal. There will be losses that feel like the end of the world. There will be victories that everyone else tries to diminish. There will be moments when giving up seems like the only rational choice. He won't be alone, Diane said firmly. He's never been alone. Good. Richard pulled out his phone. Victoria's tantrum aside, what happened here today was remarkable. Marcus didn't just win a chess game, he proved something that the chess world needs to remember. That talent doesn't care about zip codes or bank accounts or the color of someone's skin. It only cares about the work you put in and the fire in your heart. He typed quickly on his phone, then looked up. I've just emailed Victoria's assistant about your raise, Mrs. Williams. It's effective immediately, and I've made sure it's properly documented. I've also scheduled Marcus's first session at the academy for Monday after school. Mr. Kellerman, Diane began, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, Richard said. I'm being entirely selfish. In 5 years, maybe less, your son is going to be one of the strongest players in the country. I want to be able to say I was part of that journey. The elevator descended through the Henderson penthouse building in silence, each floor marking their return to a different world. Marcus held the Capablanca chess set against his chest, still hardly believing it was real. His mother stood beside him, her shoulders straighter than he'd seen them in years, as if the weight she'd been carrying had suddenly been redistributed into something more manageable. Mama, Marcus said softly as they passed the 20th floor, are you okay? Diane looked down at her son, and for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to truly smile. Not the tired smile she wore when she came home from work, not the forced smile when she told him everything would be okay, but a real smile that reached her eyes and seemed to illuminate the small elevator car. Your father, she said, her voice thick with emotion, would have been so proud. Not just because you won, but because of how you won. With dignity. With grace. Without letting them make you small. The elevator opened to the marble lobby, where Francisco, the doorman who'd watched them come and go for 3 years, always with a sympathetic nod for Diane and a kind word for Marcus, stood at his post. His eyes widened as he saw them. Mrs. Williams, Marcus. I heard, he stopped himself, glancing around the empty lobby, then leaned closer, whispering conspiratorially, is it true? Did young Marcus really beat Mrs. Henderson at chess? Word traveled fast in buildings like these, through the invisible network of people who made the lives of the wealthy possible, doormen and drivers, maids and maintenance workers, all connected by shared experiences and whispered stories of the people they served. It's true, Diane said, and there was pride in her voice that Marcus had never heard before. Francisco let out a low whistle, then raised his hand for Marcus to high-five. Little man, you just did what everyone who works in this building has dreamed of doing, you showed them we're more than what they think we are. As they walked out onto Fifth Avenue, the city seemed different somehow. The same buildings towered above them, the same expensive cars cruised past, the same well-dressed people hurried by without making eye contact. But Marcus felt as if he'd shifted slightly out of phase with it all, as if he could see it clearly for the first time. We should celebrate, Diane said suddenly. Ice cream. Pizza. What do you want? Marcus looked at his mother, really looked at her. She was 34 years old, but the last 3 years had aged her more than the previous decade. There were lines around her eyes from worry, a permanent tension in her shoulders from constantly bracing for the next crisis. She'd given up everything for him, her career, her dreams, her dignity, day after day, cleaning up after people who saw her as barely human. I want to go see Dad, Marcus said. Diane's expression shifted, surprise giving way to understanding. They hadn't visited the cemetery since the anniversary of his death 6 months ago. It was too painful, too expensive to get there, too much of a reminder of everything they'd lost. Okay, she said softly. Let's go see Dad. They took the subway to Queens, the Capablanca chess set hidden in a shopping bag to avoid attention. The train was Saturday afternoon crowded, filled with families heading to visit relatives, teenagers going to parties, people living their ordinary lives. Marcus and his mother found seats near the back, and Marcus carefully placed the bag between his feet. Tell me about the game, Diane said as the train rumbled through the tunnel. I saw you playing, but I don't understand chess well enough to know what was really happening. So Marcus told her, move by move, explaining the strategy, the tactics, the psychological warfare that had played out on the 64 squares. He told her about the Sicilian defense, about the king hunt, about the moment he'd known he would win. But more than that, he told her about how he'd felt, the fear, the anger, the determination, and finally, the strange calm that had descended when he'd realized that Mrs. Henderson's perceived superiority was just an illusion, as fragile as a king without defenders. The cemetery was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between the headstones. William Marcus Williams's grave was in a modest section, a simple granite marker among thousands of others. Someone, Diane, Marcus realized, had placed fresh flowers there recently, purple asters that hadn't yet begun to wilt. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of absence pressing down on them. Then Marcus knelt, placing the chess set carefully on the grass beside the headstone. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice catching slightly. I played chess today. Real chess, like you taught me. The Sicilian defense, just like you showed me. The Najorf variation. The wind rustled through the trees, and Marcus could almost imagine it was his father's response, his father's presence, his father's pride. I played against this rich lady who thought I was nothing. She said things about Mama, cruel things. But I remembered what you told me, that chess doesn't care who you are, only how you think. So I thought. I calculated. I played like you taught me to play. He opened the box, revealing the Capablanca set to the evening light. And I won, Dad. Not just the game, I won this. A Grandmaster gave it to me. Said I played a game that would make masters proud. Said I could be a champion someday. Diane knelt beside her son, her hand on his shoulder. Tell him about the scholarship, she whispered. There's a chess academy, Marcus continued, his words coming faster now. The best in the city. They're going to train me for free. And Mama's salary got doubled, so we can afford things now. Maybe even a better apartment. Maybe even. He paused, looking at his mother. Maybe even medical school, someday. For you. Marcus, Diane began, but he shook his head. You gave up everything for me. When Dad got sick, when he died, when we had nothing, you gave up your dreams so I could survive. But Dad always said chess was about thinking ahead, seeing the whole board. And I see it now. I see how we get from here to where we should be. He stood up, still holding the chess set. I'm going to become a master, Dad. A real master, with a title and everything. I'm going to play in tournaments you should have played in. I'm going to win games you should have won. And everyone's going to know my name, our name. William Marcus Williams's son, the chess champion. They stayed until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Marcus of the chessboard's alternating squares. As they walked back toward the cemetery entrance, Diane's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her eyes widened. What is it? Marcus asked. She showed him the screen. It was a bank notification. Her latest paycheck had been deposited, with the new, doubled amount. It was more money than she'd ever seen in a single payment, more than they'd had at once since before his father got sick. It's real, she whispered. It's really real. As they waited for the subway back to Manhattan, Marcus's phone, an old model Diane had bought him for emergencies, chirped with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message from Richard Kellerman. Marcus, I've enrolled you in the New York State Scholastic Championship next month. Entry fee paid. I'll cover transportation. You'll be playing in the open section against players up to 18 years old. They won't be expecting you. Use that. RK, Marcus showed his mother the message, and she pulled him into a fierce hug right there on the platform, not caring who saw, not caring about maintaining the invisible dignity of the working class. Her son had done something extraordinary, and she would celebrate it. The train arrived, and they found seats by the window. As the city rushed past in a blur of lights and shadows, Marcus opened the Capablanca set again, running his fingers over the intricately carved pieces. Each one was perfect, weighted perfectly, crafted by hands that understood that chess pieces weren't just game tokens, they were symbols, weapons, partners in an ancient dance of mind against mind. "Do you think Mrs. Henderson will really keep her word?" Marcus asked suddenly. "About the salary?" "Mr. Kellerman will make sure of it," Diane said. "And honestly, I think she's too embarrassed to go back on it now. Her brother knows, the doorman knows, by Monday, half the building will know. She'll pay to keep up appearances if nothing else. But she'll make your job harder." Diane was quiet for a moment, considering. "Maybe. Or maybe she'll pretend this never happened, create some story where she was the generous patron who discovered a prodigy. Rich people are good at rewriting history to make themselves the heroes." "You're not going to quit?" "Not yet," Diane said firmly. "We need the money, especially the new salary. I'll endure whatever I have to endure so you can focus on chess, on school, on becoming who you're meant to be. That's what parents do." Marcus leaned against his mother's shoulder, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the day was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep tiredness and a strange sense of displacement, as if he'd aged years in a single afternoon. "Mama," he said quietly. "What if I'm not as good as Mr. Kellerman thinks? What if today was just luck?" Diane turned to look at her son directly. "Marcus, I watched you today. I don't understand chess, but I understand you. That wasn't luck. That was 3 years of playing alone in libraries, of studying your father's old books, of keeping his memory alive through every move you practiced. That was preparation meeting opportunity." She brushed a hand over his hair, a gesture of comfort he was almost too old for but still needed. "You're going to face harder opponents than Mrs. Henderson. You're going to lose games. You're going to have days when you doubt everything. But you've already done the hardest thing, you've proven to yourself that you belong at that board." As the train pulled into their station, Marcus carefully packed away the chess set. Tomorrow, he would start preparing for the state championship. He would begin his formal training at the Kellerman Academy. He would step into a world that had been closed to his father, armed with nothing but 64 squares and the determination to prove that talent could bloom anywhere, even in the shadows of penthouse apartments and marble lobbies. But tonight, he was just a 12-year-old boy who'd stood up to a bully and won, who'd honored his father's memory, who'd given his mother hope. As they climbed the stairs to their small apartment, Marcus felt the weight of the chess set in his hands, not just the physical weight of wood and ivory, but the weight of history, of possibility, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. Monday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made New York City feel electric with possibility. Marcus stood outside the Kellerman Chess Academy on the Upper West Side, the Capablanca chess set in his backpack feeling heavier than its actual weight. The building was different from what he'd expected, not some gleaming modern structure but a converted brownstone with tall windows and an elegant carved door that whispered of old money and older traditions. A brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Kellerman Chess Academy, EST 1987, every master was once a student." Marcus took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The interior was like stepping into another world. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, decorated with photographs of famous chess players and positions from historic games. The air smelled of coffee, old books, and furniture polish. From somewhere deeper in the building came the distinctive sound of chess clocks being slapped and pieces being moved with confident precision. "You must be Marcus." The voice belonged to a young woman, maybe 25, with short red hair and intense green eyes. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Chess players do it 64 squares at a time," which made Marcus blush slightly. "I'm Sarah Chen," she said, extending her hand. "International master, and Richard's assistant instructor. He told me to expect you, though he undersold how young you'd be." Marcus shook her hand, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Age doesn't matter in chess." Sarah grinned. Spoken like someone who's been underestimated before. Good. You'll need that attitude here. Come on, let me show you around. She led him through the building, which was larger inside than it appeared from the street. The first floor held a library with thousands of chess books, some so old their spines were crumbling. The second floor was divided into analysis rooms, each with multiple boards and computer stations. The third floor was one large tournament hall, with 20 boards set up and ready for play. This is where you'll be spending most of your time, Sarah said, gesturing to the tournament hall. Every afternoon, 4 to 7 p.m. Weekends, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Can you commit to that? My mom works, Marcus began, then stopped. With her doubled salary, maybe she could adjust her hours. I'll make it work. Sarah studied him for a moment. Richard told me what happened Saturday. With his sister. Marcus tensed, wondering if this was where he learned that the chess world was just as prejudiced as everywhere else, just better at hiding it. Good for you, Sarah said simply. Victoria Henderson has been using her money to pretend she's a chess player for years. About time someone showed her what real talent looks like. Before Marcus could respond, a door at the far end of the hall opened, and Richard Kellerman entered, followed by 4 other students. They were all older than Marcus, the youngest looked about 15, the oldest maybe 18. They were also all white, all boys, and all staring at Marcus with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Ah, Marcus, perfect timing, Richard said warmly. Everyone, this is our newest student, Marcus Williams. Marcus, meet your training partners. The tallest boy, blonde with the kind of perfect features that belonged on a college brochure, stepped forward. I'm Alexander Hartley. Alex. I heard you beat Richard's sister. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. News travels fast, Marcus said carefully. In the chess world. Everything travels fast, said another boy, shorter with dark hair and thick glasses. I'm David Rosenberg. What's your rating? I don't have one, Marcus admitted. I've only played online and casual games. The boys exchanged glances, and Marcus could read their thoughts clearly, another kid who thought beating some amateur meant he could play real chess. Online rating, pressed a third boy, stocky with brown hair. Around 2,200 on the main servers. That's decent, David admitted grudgingly. But online is different. People cheat, use engines. Real chess, over the board, that's where you find out who can actually play. Then let's find out, Richard said, his tone mild but carrying authority. Marcus, you'll play each of them. Rapid games, 15 minutes per side. Sarah will observe and take notes. Gentlemen, don't hold back because he's younger. That would be disrespectful to everyone involved. Alex gestured to the nearest board. I'll go first. They sat down, and Marcus noticed how Alex set up the pieces, quick, efficient, practiced. This was someone who'd been playing competitive chess for years, who knew the rituals and rhythms of tournament play. When they shook hands, Alex's grip was firm, confident. Marcus had black again. Alex opened with e4, and Marcus responded with c5, the Sicilian, his weapon of choice. But Alex didn't play the main lines Marcus had studied. Instead, he went for the Rossolimo variation, putting his bishop on b5 immediately, a system designed to avoid the sharp theoretical battles of the open Sicilian. The game was different from his match with Mrs. Henderson. Alex was strong, genuinely strong. His pieces coordinated beautifully, his pawns advanced in harmony, his tactics were sound. He played with the confidence of someone who'd won dozens of tournaments, someone who expected to win. But Marcus had spent 3 years playing against computers that never made mistakes, against anonymous masters who destroyed him repeatedly until he learned to fight back. He found defensive resources Alex didn't expect, small tactical shots that disrupted White's smooth build-up. When Alex sacrificed a piece for what looked like a winning attack, Marcus found the only defense, a quiet king move that made all of White's threats evaporate. The other boys had gathered around the board, watching in silence. Even Sarah had moved closer, her trained eye following the complex tactical sequence unfolding. Alex's clock ticked down as he searched desperately for a way to justify his sacrifice. With 2 minutes left to Marcus's 7, he was lost, down a piece with no compensation. But instead of resigning, he played on, making Marcus prove he could convert the advantage. Marcus did, methodically, precisely, without a single inaccuracy. When Alex's king finally had nowhere to run, the older boy tipped it over and extended his hand. "Good game," Alex said, and Marcus heard genuine respect in his voice. "The defensive sequence after my knight's sacrifice, where did you learn that?" "My dad used to call it finding the only move," Marcus replied. "He said when you're under pressure, don't look for a good move, look for the only move that keeps you alive." David was next, and he played the French defense as black, a solid, strategic opening that led to closed positions requiring deep planning. Marcus had to grind him down slowly, accumulating small advantages until they added up to something decisive. David resigned in a difficult endgame, down 2 pawns with no counterplay. The third boy, who introduced himself as Tommy Chen, Sarah's younger brother, Marcus learned, played the sharpest, most tactical game. The position turned into a chaotic mess of hanging pieces and mutual threats, the kind of position where one mistake meant instant death. Marcus navigated it like a tightrope walker, finding a spectacular queen sacrifice that forced checkmate in 5 moves. The last boy, Eric Volkov, was the strongest. He was also the only one who didn't seem surprised by Marcus's skill. He played the Grunfeld defense as black, a hypermodern opening that invited White to build a big center only to destroy it later. The game was a strategic masterpiece from both sides, each player maneuvering for tiny advantages, probing for weaknesses. With time running low, both players under a minute, the position was almost equal, but Marcus had a minimal edge in a rook endgame. What followed was blitz chess at its finest, hands flying, pieces slamming, clocks banging. Marcus's hand speed, honed by thousands of online blitz games, gave him the edge. He promoted a pawn with 3 seconds on his clock to Eric's 1. Eric resigned with a respectful nod. 4 games. 4 wins. The room was silent. "Well," Richard said finally, a smile playing at his lips, "I believe that answers any questions about whether Marcus belongs here." "He's not just good," Sarah said, still staring at the final position. "He's already master strength. Maybe stronger." "Richard, where has he been?" "Surviving," Marcus said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone look at him differently. "Just trying to survive." Alex was the first to break the awkward silence that followed. "The state championship is in 3 weeks. You're playing in the open section." Marcus nodded. "We all are," David said. "It's going to be brutal. There are 2 GMs registered, 5 IMs, and at least a dozen masters. You're going to be the lowest rated player there." "Unrated," Tommy corrected. "He'll be unrated, which means he's a wild card. No one will know how to prepare for him." "That's an advantage," Eric said thoughtfully. "Everyone else has hundreds of games in the database. Marcus is a ghost. They won't know whether he plays E4 or D4, whether he likes tactics or positional play, whether he cracks under time pressure or thrives in it." "We have 3 weeks to get him ready," Richard announced. "That means intensive training. Marcus, can you be here every day after school?" Marcus thought about his mother, about the long hours she worked, about the homework he'd need to juggle. "Yes." "Good. Sarah will work with you on openings, you need a broader repertoire. I'll handle endgames and strategic planning. The boys will be your training partners for practice games." Richard paused, looking around the room. "I want to be clear about something. Marcus is 12 years old. He's also quite possibly the most naturally talented player I've encountered in 40 years of teaching. The fact that he's here, that he's had to fight for the chance to play the game we all love, should remind us that chess is bigger than our small circles, our comfortable traditions. Also, Sarah added with a grin, if any of you lose to him in the state championship, you're buying pizza for everyone. The tension broke, and everyone laughed, even Marcus. David clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I'll show you the computer lab. We have databases with millions of games. You can study anyone's repertoire. As the group dispersed to various training activities, Alex hung back. Hey, Marcus. That game we just played, I've been studying the Rossolimo for 2 years. I've played it in dozens of tournaments. You found moves I've never seen before. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. My dad sponsors young players sometimes. If you need help with equipment, entry fees, anything like that. Marcus felt a flash of pride that wanted to refuse, to say he didn't need charity. But then he remembered his father's words, pride is good, son, but stupid pride is just stupid. Thanks, Marcus said simply. I might take you up on that. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself absorbed into the rhythm of the academy. He analyzed games with David, studied endgames with Sarah, and played blitz with Tommy. Eric showed him obscure opening variations that weren't in the books yet, fresh ideas from recent super tournaments. For the first time since his father died, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere. Not as the Maid's son who had to be invisible, not as the poor kid who couldn't afford entry fees, but as a chess player among chess players, judged only by the quality of his moves. The 3 weeks before the state championship passed in a blur of chess notation, opening theory, and endgame practice. Marcus's life developed a rhythm: school until 3 p.m., the academy until 7 p.m., homework until midnight, then analyzing games on his phone until he fell asleep. His teachers noticed him drawing chess positions in his notebook margins, but his grades remained solid. Chess had taught him to calculate efficiently, to see patterns, to think ahead. At home, the change in their circumstances was immediately visible. Diane had used her first doubled paycheck to buy real groceries, fresh vegetables, quality meat, fruit that wasn't on the edge of expiring. She'd bought Marcus new clothes that actually fit, replacing the hand-me-downs and thrift store finds he'd worn for years. Small luxuries that most people took for granted felt like miracles. Mrs. Henderson hasn't said a word to me, Diane told him one evening, unpacking groceries that included, miraculously, Marcus's favorite cereal, the expensive kind they'd always walked past. She leaves my checks in an envelope, gives instructions through her assistant. It's like I've become even more invisible than before. Maybe that's better, Marcus suggested, helping her put away the food. Maybe, Diane agreed, but Marcus could see the toll it took on her, being treated like she didn't exist. But it's worth it. Seeing you at that academy, seeing you with those other boys who respect your talent, baby, that's worth everything. At the academy, Marcus's presence had shifted from novelty to necessity. The other boys had quickly realized that playing against him made them stronger. His unconventional style, formed in the crucible of anonymous online play, forced them out of their comfort zones. You play like a computer sometimes, Alex told him after a particularly brutal game where Marcus had sacrificed 2 pieces for a winning attack. But then you play these deeply human moves that no engine would find. It's unsettling. Good unsettling or bad unsettling? Marcus asked. Good for training. Bad if I have to play you in the tournament. Sarah had taken special interest in Marcus's development, working with him on opening repertoires that would suit his style. You're naturally tactical, she observed, showing him a position from the king's Indian defense. But the best players can switch between tactical and positional play depending on what the position requires. You need to be unpredictable. The king's Indian is perfect for you, Sarah continued, adjusting pieces on the demonstration board. It looks like black is getting crushed, but then suddenly you explode with tactics. Very much your style, patient until the moment to strike. They spent hours on the Nimzo Indian, the Grunfeld, sharp lines in the Caro-Can that most junior players never studied. Sarah was building him a repertoire that would last years, not just get him through one tournament. Most kids your age learn a few tricks and hope their opponents fall for them, she explained. But you're not most kids. We're preparing you to play against masters who've seen every trick. You need to understand the positions, not just memorize moves. Richard handled the psychological preparation with the subtlety of a master. He never directly mentioned race, class, or the obvious differences between Marcus and most tournament players, but his lessons carry deeper meanings. Chess is a conversation, he told Marcus during an endgame session. Your opponent makes a statement with their move, and you respond. Some players try to shout, playing aggressive, intimidating moves. Others whisper, quiet, positional play that slowly improves their position. The key is to not let their volume affect your response. Play the board, not the person. Even when the person doesn't think I belong there. Richard's eyes sharpened. Especially then. The board doesn't care what anyone thinks. It only cares about truth, the truth of the position, the truth of correct moves. That's your advantage, Marcus. You've had to find truth your whole life, while others have had the luxury of comfortable lies. 2 days before the tournament, Marcus was paired against Eric in a training game when an unexpected visitor arrived. The academy door opened, and a tall black man in an expensive suit entered, followed by a teenage boy about 15 years old. Richard, the man called out warmly. Sorry to drop by unannounced. Richard's face lit up. James. Not at all. Everyone, this is GM James Washington, one of only 3 black grandmasters in the United States. James, these are my students. Marcus stared. He'd studied Washington's games online, brilliant attacking chess that had earned him the nickname, the tactician. But seeing him in person, successful and confident, was different from seeing his moves on a screen. This is my son, Malik, GM Washington said, gesturing to the teenager. He's playing in the state championship this weekend. Thought we'd stop by for some practice games. Malik was everything Marcus wasn't, tall, confident, wearing designer clothes that fit perfectly. His chess bag had his initials monogrammed on it. When he walked, it was with the assurance of someone who'd never been asked to be invisible. You must be Marcus Williams, GM Washington said, turning to Marcus with interest. Richard called me about you. Said you're William Williams's son. Marcus nodded, suddenly unable to speak. Your father was a brilliant player, Washington continued. We played once, at the National Open in '94. He destroyed me in a Sicilian dragon. 25 moves, absolutely brutal. I studied that game for months trying to understand what happened. You knew my dad. I knew of him. We all did, the black players who were trying to make it in the '90s. Your father was the one everyone thought would break through, would finally get the support and recognition he deserved. Washington's expression grew somber. When he stopped playing, we all felt it. Like a light had gone out. He got sick, Marcus said quietly. Cancer. I heard. I'm sorry. Washington pulled up a chair. But Richard tells me you've inherited his talent. Maybe more than his talent. Mind if I watch your game? Marcus and Eric resumed their game, but Marcus was hyper-aware of the GM's presence. Every move felt scrutinized, evaluated. He started playing more carefully, more conventionally, trying to avoid mistakes rather than find the best moves. You're playing scared, Malik observed, not unkindly. Dad has that effect on people. I'm not scared, Marcus said, but his hand hesitated over his knight. Marcus, GM Washington said gently, what would your father tell you right now? Marcus thought back to those Saturday mornings in the library, his father's patient voice explaining positions. The board doesn't know who's watching, he quoted. Play the position, not the situation. Exactly. Washington smiled. So play. Marcus took a breath, centered himself, and found his rhythm again. The game transformed from careful maneuvering to sharp tactical combat. When Eric sacrificed an exchange for an attack, Marcus found a stunning defensive resource, a quiet pawn move that looked suicidal but actually trapped White's queen. Eric resigned 5 moves later. Now that, Washington said approvingly, was William's chess. Your father had that same gift, seeing resources others missed, finding moves that shouldn't work but do. He turned to Richard. You're entering him in the open section. He needs to play the strongest competition available, Richard replied. No point in him destroying kids his age. He needs to be challenged. Malik's playing open too, Washington said. Maybe they'll be paired. Malik studied Marcus with curious eyes. How long have you been playing tournaments? This will be my first real one. First. Malik's eyebrows shot up. And you're going straight into open. That's. He paused, choosing his words. Brave. Or stupid, David muttered from another board. Not stupid, Washington said firmly. Necessary. Marcus has something most players spend years trying to develop, fearlessness born from having nothing to lose. That's an advantage, not a weakness. He stood, pulling a business card from his wallet. My contact information, he said, handing it to Marcus. After the tournament, regardless of how you do, call me. There are programs, scholarships, opportunities for talented black players. Your father would have qualified for all of them, but they didn't exist then. They do now. As the Washingtons left, Sarah moved next to Marcus. You okay? You look a little shell-shocked. I just met a black grandmaster, Marcus said wonderingly. I didn't even know. I mean, I knew they existed, but it's different seeing it in person, Sarah finished. Seeing someone who looks like you succeeding at the highest level. Yeah. Use that, she advised. This weekend, when you're sitting across from players who think you don't belong, remember that James Washington exists. Remember that your father should have been a GM too. Remember that you're not just playing for yourself. The final training session on Friday was intense. Richard had Marcus play simultaneous games against all 4 academy students, 5 boards at once, walking between them, having to keep all the positions in his head. It was exhausting, but it simulated the mental fatigue of a long tournament day. He won 3 games and drew 2. You're ready, Richard announced. Your openings are solid, your tactics are sharp, your endgame technique is improving. More importantly, you have something many stronger players lack, hunger. You want this in a way that comfortable people rarely want anything. That night, Marcus barely slept. He lay in bed with the Capablanca chess set on his nightstand, moonlight turning the pieces into shadows and suggestions. Tomorrow, he would enter a world his father had been excluded from, armed with 3 weeks of intensive training and 3 years of desperate practice. His phone buzzed. A text from Alex, get some sleep. Tomorrow you show them all who you really are. Another from David, I've been thinking. If you beat a GM tomorrow, I'll buy your pizza for a month. Even Eric, usually reserved, had sent a message. Marcus had to use Google Translate, it meant, play well, in Russian. His mother appeared in his doorway. Can't sleep. Too nervous, Marcus admitted. She sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress creaking slightly. Your father used to say that nervousness was just excitement wearing a disguise. That the body couldn't tell the difference between fear and anticipation, so you might as well choose anticipation. What if I embarrass myself? What if everyone was wrong about me, and I'm just some kid who got lucky once? Then you're still the boy who beat Victoria Henderson and earned a chance to find out. That's more than most people ever do, they never even try to discover what they're capable of. She brushed his forehead gently. But Marcus? I've watched you these 3 weeks. I've seen you studying until your eyes could barely stay open. I've seen you transform from my little boy into someone with purpose, with direction. Win or lose tomorrow, you've already become something special. I want to make Dad proud. Baby, Diane said softly, he already is. The New York State Chess Championship was held at the Javits Center, a massive glass and steel structure on the west side of Manhattan. Marcus arrived at 7:30 a.m., 90 minutes before the first round, his stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. The Capablanca set was in his backpack. He wouldn't use it for play, but having it close felt like carrying a piece of his father with him. The playing hall was enormous, 300 boards arranged in neat rows, divided into different sections. The open section, where Marcus would play, occupied the front area, maybe 50 boards for the strongest players in the state. Behind them stretched the other sections, under 2,000, under 1,600, under 1,200, and the scholastic divisions by age. Players were already warming up, studying opening prep on tablets, or analyzing positions on pocket sets. Marcus recognized the focused intensity, the pre-battle ritual of chess players preparing for war on 64 squares. Marcus. Over here. Alex waved from a cluster of Kellerman Academy students. They'd commandeered a table in the analysis room, their boards and laptops already set up. First tournament lesson, David said as Marcus joined them. Always arrive early enough to get a good analysis spot. This is where we'll go between rounds to figure out what went wrong. Or celebrate what went right, Tommy added optimistically. Sarah appeared with Richard, both carrying coffee. Pairings go up in 30 minutes, she announced. Marcus, you're playing as unrated, which means the computer will pair you randomly in the first round. Could be anyone from a 1200 to a Grandmaster. Speaking of which, Eric nodded toward the entrance. GM James Washington had arrived with Malik, but they weren't alone. Two other GMs accompanied them, and Marcus recognized them from chess magazines, GM Igor Petrosian, a former Soviet champion who now lived in Brooklyn, and GM Jennifer Yu, one of the strongest female players in the country. The big guns are here, Richard murmured. This is going to be a serious tournament. Marcus watched the GMs with a mixture of awe and determination. They moved with casual confidence, greeting other masters, discussing positions, completely at ease in this environment. Meanwhile, Marcus was still getting used to the idea that he was allowed to be here at all. The pairings went up at 8:30, and players crowded around the sheets posted on the wall. Marcus found his name near the bottom, Williams, Marcus, UNR, and traced across to his opponent. His heart nearly stopped. Round 1, Williams, Marcus, UNR, versus Petrosian, Igor, 2652. You're playing Petrosian? David said, reading over his shoulder. In round 1. That's a massacre, Tommy finished. Petrosian hasn't lost to anyone rated under 2,415 years. It's an opportunity, Richard said firmly, though Marcus could see concern in his eyes. You have nothing to lose, Marcus. Play your game. Marcus found his board, table 3, prominently positioned where spectators could watch. Petrosian was already there, a bear of a man with thick gray eyebrows and hands that made the pieces look like toys. He was analyzing a position on a pocket set, completely absorbed. Marcus sat down and arranged his pieces, standard plastic tournament pieces, not nearly as nice as the Capablanca set but regulation for competitive play. His hands were trembling slightly. You are Williams? Petrosian's voice was heavily accented but clear. The boy Kellerman tells me about. Yes, sir. Petrosian studied him with eyes that had seen thousands of games, tens of thousands of positions. How old? 12. 12. Petrosian shook his head. When I was 12, I was afraid to play the men. Now, 12-year-olds challenge grandmasters. He extended his massive hand. We see what you have. The tournament director called for clocks to be started. Petrosian had white and opened with his trademark 1.d4. Marcus responded with the king's Indian defense, the opening Sarah had said suited his style. What followed was a chess lesson disguised as a game. Petrosian played simple, strong moves that gradually improved his position. No tricks, no traps, just pure chess that accumulated advantages like compound interest. Marcus fought hard, finding defensive resources, keeping the position complex, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. On move 23, Petrosian sacrificed in exchange, rook for bishop, to destroy Marcus's kingside pawn structure. It wasn't a flashy sacrifice, not the kind that would make it into puzzle books. It was just correct, transforming a small advantage into a winning one. Marcus played on for another 15 moves, hoping for a miracle, but Petrosian's technique was flawless. When Marcus finally resigned, down 2 pawns in a hopeless endgame, the Russian GM nodded approvingly. "You play not bad," he said, which from Petrosian was high praise. "The defense on move 18, very nice. You lose, but you lose like chess player, not like child." Marcus found the academy team in the analysis room, going over their games. Alex had won against a master, David had drawn, Tommy and Eric had both won their games against expert-level players. "How bad was it?" Sarah asked gently. "I learned a lot," Marcus said, which was true. Playing Petrosian had been like taking a masterclass in positional chess. He didn't beat me with tactics. He just played better chess, move after move, until I had nothing left. "That's Petrosian," Richard said. "He grinds you down like water wearing away stone. Don't be discouraged, most masters would have lost the same way." Round 2 came after a short break. This time Marcus was paired against an expert rated 2150, a middle-aged man named Howard Stern who seemed annoyed to be playing an unrated kid. "Let's make this quick," Stern said dismissively. "I have real opponents to prepare for later." The dismissal ignited something in Marcus. He played the Sicilian defense, steering toward the sharpest variations. When Stern played carelessly, assuming the unrated kid wouldn't know the theory, Marcus punished him with a piece sacrifice that led to a vicious attack. Stern's casual confidence evaporated as his position crumbled. He spent 30 minutes on a single move, trying to find a defense, but there wasn't one. When Marcus played QH3, threatening checkmate in 3 different ways, Stern's hand hovered over his king for a long moment before tipping it over. "Who the hell are you?" Stern demanded. "Just an unrated kid," Marcus replied quietly, and several players nearby who'd been watching chuckled. Round 3, Marcus faced a master rated 2320, a young woman named Cristina Lopez who'd won the state women's championship twice. She played solid, careful chess, respecting Marcus despite his lack of rating. The game was a strategic battle, both players maneuvering for small advantages. Marcus found a tactical shot in the middle game that won a pawn, but Cristina fought back hard in the endgame. It came down to a rook and pawn ending with Marcus up a single pawn. "This should be drawn," Cristina said, though she was still playing. "But you're playing it perfectly." Marcus remembered Richard's endgame lessons, the principle of cutting off the enemy king, of using your own king actively. Move by move, he pushed his pawn forward, Cristina's king always 1 square too far away to help. When his pawn reached the 7th rank, she resigned. "Good technique," she said, shaking his hand. "You're not really unrated, are you? You're someone's secret weapon." "I'm nobody's anything," Marcus said. "I'm just here to play chess." After 3 rounds, Marcus had 2 points out of 3, a loss to a GM and wins against an expert and master. The computer system, trying to figure out his strength, paired him up again for round 4. His opponent was Malik Washington. They sat across from each other, 2 black teenagers in a sea of mostly white and Asian faces, both carrying the weight of representation whether they wanted it or not. "My dad says your dad was brilliant," Malik said as they shook hands. "Your dad is brilliant," Marcus replied. "Present tense beats past tense," Malik said, but not unkindly. "Let's play some chess." The game against Malik Washington was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Where Petrosian had been a slow positional crush and Stern had been tactical fireworks, Malik played with a dynamic balance that seemed to shift with every move. He was tactical when the position called for it, positional when that was required, always adapting, always dangerous. Marcus played the French defense, hoping to reach the kind of closed position where he could maneuver carefully. But Malik knew the French better than Marcus did, steering toward a variation Marcus had only seen once in his preparation. "The winnower poison pawn," Malik said as he captured on h7. "Your move." Marcus stared at the position. Taking the pawn looked suicidal, it opened his king to attack, but not taking it left him down material with no compensation. He remembered something his father had said, "When you don't know the theory, think for yourself. Sometimes the human move is better than the book move." He didn't take the pawn. Instead, he played a quiet developing move that Sarah hadn't shown him but which felt right. Malik's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's not in any database," he said. "Good," Marcus replied, and for the first time in the game, he saw uncertainty flicker across Malik's face. The middle game was a complex dance of pieces, each player probing for weaknesses while defending their own vulnerabilities. Marcus sacrificed a pawn to activate his pieces, and Malik sacrificed it back to maintain coordination. They were playing at a level that drew spectators, including several masters who'd finished their own games. "These kids are good," Marcus heard someone whisper. On move 27, Malik made his first real mistake, not a blunder, just an inaccuracy that gave Marcus a small chance. He played QD2 instead of QC2, and suddenly Marcus's rook had access to the second rank. It was the kind of advantage that wouldn't matter between amateurs but could be decisive between strong players. Marcus built on that small advantage with patient precision. He improved his pieces incrementally, restricted Malik's counterplay, and slowly pushed his queenside pawns forward. Malik fought back brilliantly, finding defensive resources that would have held against most players. But Marcus had learned something from his loss to Petrosian: how to maintain pressure without releasing tension, how to make your opponent find difficult moves again and again until they finally cracked. On move 45, with both players low on time, Malik made his second mistake. He moved his king to g7 instead of h7, and suddenly Marcus had a tactical sequence that won a piece. It took him 30 seconds to calculate it fully, then he played it with confidence, rxf4, a thunderbolt that destroyed Black's coordination. Malik stared at the position for a full minute, calculating every possible defense. Finally, he extended his hand. "Good game. Really good game." GM Washington had been watching the final moves. As the boys analyzed the game together, he observed quietly, occasionally pointing out improvements for both sides. "Marcus, that novelty in the opening, where did that come from?" he asked. "Nowhere. I just thought it looked right." Washington laughed. "The best moves often come from nowhere. Malik, you played well, but you got impatient." Marcus was content to play a long game, and that patience paid off. "He plays like an old man," Malik said, but he was smiling. "I mean that as a compliment. No rushing, no panic, just steady improvement." "Like my dad taught me," Marcus said. "He used to say chess was like life, sometimes the best move is to just make your position a little better and wait for your chances." After 4 rounds, the standings were posted. Marcus was 3-1, tied for 5th place in a field of 52 players. The leaders were the 3 GMs, all at 4-0, followed by 2 international masters at 3.5. Marcus was the highest-scoring unrated player in the tournament's history after 4 rounds. "You're making noise," Sarah told him during the dinner break. "People are starting to ask questions. Who is this kid? Where did he come from?" Round 5 was Saturday evening, and Marcus was paired against Carlos Mendez, a professional player who made his living teaching and writing chess books. Mendez was known for his opening preparation, often catching opponents in deep theoretical lines they didn't know. But Marcus had an advantage: no game history meant Mendez couldn't prepare specifically for him. The IM had to guess what Marcus would play, and he guessed wrong, preparing for the Sicilian when Marcus played the Caro-Can. The game was the longest Marcus had played, stretching to 67 moves and nearly 4 hours. Mendez sacrificed a pawn in the opening for active pieces, and Marcus had to defend precisely for 20 moves before the tactics turned in his favor. In a complex rook and minor piece endgame, Marcus found a stunning piece sacrifice that forced a winning king and pawn ending. When Mendez resigned, he shook his head in amazement. "How old are you?" 12. 12. Mendez looked at the position again. "That rook sacrifice on move 54, I'm going to use that in my next book." "What's your name again?" "Marcus Williams." "Remember that name," Mendez told the spectators who'd gathered. "You're going to hear it again." Day 1 ended with Marcus at 4-1, tied for 4th place. Only the 3 GMs remained perfect at 5-0. The Academy team celebrated at a pizza place near the venue, everyone talking at once about their games, their opponents, their chances for day 2. "You beat an IM," David kept saying. "An actual international master. Do you understand how insane that is?" "The tournament's not over," Marcus said, but he was smiling. For the first time, he was starting to believe he belonged here. Richard raised his soda in a toast. "To Marcus Williams, who's showing the chess world that talent can come from anywhere." "To all of us," Marcus corrected. "The whole Academy. We're all showing them something." That night in his room, Marcus called his mother, who was still at work. Mrs. Henderson had scheduled a dinner party that required extra hours. "How did it go, baby?" she asked, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I'm in 4th place, Mama. Out of 52 players. I beat an international master today." There was silence on the other end, then he heard her crying softly. "Your father. Marcus, your father would be so proud." "I'm so proud. Tomorrow's going to be harder. I'll probably play one of the GMs." "Then you play a GM," Diane said firmly. "You've already done impossible things. What's one more?" Sunday morning came gray and rainy, matching Marcus's nervous mood. Round 6 pairings confirmed his fears. He was playing GM Jennifer Yu on board 2, right next to where Petrosian was facing GM Washington on board 1. Yu was 24 years old, had been women's world junior champion, and was known for her attacking style. She studied Marcus as he sat down, taking in his young face, his slightly too big tournament shirt, his serious expression. "You're the sensation everyone's talking about," she said. "The unrated kid who's beating masters." "I've been lucky," Marcus said. "No," you said, "luck doesn't beat international masters. You're good. The question is, how good?" She had white and opened with 1.e4. Marcus played the Sicilian dragon, the sharpest variation he knew, announcing his intention to fight fire with fire. You smiled slightly, accepting the challenge. What followed was a tactical melee that had spectators 3 rows deep. Both players sacrificed pieces, both kings came under fire, and the position became so complex that even masters watching couldn't evaluate who was better. Marcus sacrificed his queen on move 23 for 2 rooks and a dangerous passed pawn. You sacrificed a rook back to eliminate the pawn. The position was chaos incarnate, with neither player having time to calculate everything. They were playing on instinct, pattern recognition, and pure chess talent. On move 31, you made a brilliant queen sacrifice of her own, and suddenly Marcus's king was running for its life. He found the only defense, a counter-sacrifice that left him with rook and bishop against her 2 rooks. The endgame was theoretically drawn, but only with perfect play. For 20 more moves, they danced on the edge of a knife. One mistake from either player would be fatal. Marcus's technique, drilled into him by Richard's endgame sessions, held firm. When they finally agreed to a draw after 52 moves, the spectators actually applauded. "You're 12. You asked, as if confirming she hadn't imagined it. "Yes." She shook her head in wonder. "When I was 12, I was still learning how the pieces moved. You just held a draw against a GM in one of the sharpest games I've played all year." The draw meant Marcus was at 4.5/6, still tied for fourth. With 3 rounds remaining, he had a mathematical chance at first place if results went his way, though the 3 GMs were still ahead at 5.5 or 6 points. Round 7 paired him against another master, someone he defeated in a technical endgame. Round 8 was against an expert who played too passively and was crushed by a kingside attack. Going into the final round, Marcus stood at 6.5/8, guaranteed at least a tie for second place. The final round pairings were dramatic, Petrosian versus you for first place on board 1. And on board 2, Washington versus Williams. James Washington looked across at Marcus with something between pride and competitiveness. 3 weeks ago, you were unrated. Now you're playing for second place in the state championship. Win or lose, that's already a victory. But winning would be better, Marcus said. Washington laughed. Yes, it would. Your father would have loved this moment, his son, playing a GM for a prize in the last round. Let's give him a game to be proud of. The final round began at noon on Sunday, with the top boards elevated on a stage so spectators could see them clearly. Marcus sat at board 2, hyper-aware of the hundreds of eyes watching, the phones recording, the murmur of commentary from masters analyzing the position in real time. James Washington had white, and he opened with 1.d4, the queen's pawn. Marcus responded with the Nimzo-Indian defense, the opening Sarah had drilled into him for 2 weeks straight. It's Kasparov's weapon, she'd said. Flexible, sound, and full of hidden resources. Washington played the classical variation with 4.qc2, avoiding the doubled pawns that came from the main line. This was a GM's understanding versus Marcus's 3 weeks of intensive study, but Marcus had something else, the fearlessness of someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. The first 15 moves followed theoretical paths, both players developing their pieces toward the center, castling kingside, maneuvering for optimal squares. But on move 16, Washington played a novelty, Rad1 instead of the standard RFD1, a subtle difference that changed the entire character of the position. Marcus thought for 10 minutes, the longest think he'd taken all tournament. The move was good, probably prepared especially for this game. Washington had done his homework, analyzed Marcus's previous games, identified his preferences. But preparation only went so far. Marcus played c5, breaking in the center, accepting a slightly worse position to create imbalance. If Washington wanted a technical game where experience would tell, Marcus wouldn't give it to him. He'd create complications where calculation mattered more than knowledge. Brave, someone in the crowd murmured. Marcus recognized I.M. Mendez's voice. Washington's response was precise, maintaining his advantage while avoiding the tactical traps Marcus was setting. For 10 moves, they danced around each other, Washington trying to consolidate his edge, Marcus trying to create chaos. Then, on move 27, Marcus found his chance. Washington played QD3, centralizing his queen, a move that looked natural and strong. But Marcus had seen deeper. He played Nex 4, sacrificing his knight for 2 pawns and a raging initiative. Washington looked at the position for a long time. The sacrifice was objectively dubious, computers would say white was better, but practically it was dangerous. Black's pieces would swarm white's position, and one mistake would be fatal. Your father played a similar sacrifice against me, Washington said quietly, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Different position, same idea, complications over clarity. The game transformed. Where it had been strategic maneuvering, it became hand-to-hand tactical combat. Marcus's pieces coordinated in an attack on white's king, while Washington tried to weather the storm and convert his material advantage. On move 35, with both players under 30 minutes, Marcus played another spectacular move, RxF3, sacrificing his rook to destroy white's kingside. The crowd gasped. Even Marcus wasn't sure it was sound, he'd calculated as far as he could and then trusted his instincts. Washington studied the position, his GM mind processing variations at incredible speed. He could take the rook, but then, QG4 would give black a devastating attack. He could decline, but then black's rook would retreat, having destroyed white's pawn structure for free. After 8 minutes, Washington took the rook. Marcus played QG4, and the attack crashed over white's position like a wave. Every white piece was misplaced, every defensive try seemed to create new problems. Washington defended with the skill of a grandmaster, finding moves that would have defeated most players' attacks. But Marcus had learned something crucial from his father, reinforced by 3 weeks at the academy: when you have the initiative, never let it go. He played H5, offering another pawn to open more lines. Then, B5, centralizing his bishop with tempo. Then, QH3, threatening mate in 1. Washington was down to 5 minutes. Marcus had 12. The position was a maze of variations, each move critical. One mistake from either player would end the game immediately. On move 42, Washington made his first real error. Under time pressure, he played KG1 instead of KH1, and suddenly Marcus had a forced sequence. He played it with the confidence of someone who'd calculated to the end: QG3+, KH1, QH3+, KG1, B5, and white's position collapsed. Washington stared at the board. He was a grandmaster, had been playing chess professionally for 20 years, had beaten world champions. But this 12-year-old boy had just created a masterpiece of attacking chess that belonged in textbooks. With 2 minutes on his clock, Washington found the best defense, but it wasn't enough. Marcus's pieces dominated the board, his passed pawns rolled forward, and on move 49, with Marcus's pawn about to promote to a queen, Washington stopped the clock. He stood and extended his hand. "Your father would be beyond proud," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That was brilliant chess. Absolutely brilliant. The room erupted. The spectators, who'd been holding their breath, burst into applause. Marcus sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. He'd just defeated a grandmaster. He, Marcus Williams, 12 years old, who'd learned chess from his father and practiced in public libraries, had just beaten one of the strongest players in America. On board 1, Petrosian had defeated you to win the tournament with 8-9. Marcus's victory meant he finished at 7.5/9, clear second place, ahead of GMU and IM Mendez, who both finished at 7-9. The closing ceremony was a blur. Marcus stood on the podium, holding his second-place trophy, almost as tall as he was, while photographers captured the moment. The $2,000 prize check felt surreal in his hands. It was more money than his mother made in a month, even with her doubled salary. "In my 40 years of organizing this tournament," the director announced, "we've never had an unrated player finish in the top 10. Marcus Williams has finished second, defeating masters, international masters, and a grandmaster. This young man is the future of American chess." Richard was beaming. Sarah was actually crying. The academy boys were cheering loudly enough to embarrass Marcus. But the best moment came when Diane arrived, having left Mrs. Henderson's dinner party early, consequences be damned. She pushed through the crowd, still in her maid's uniform, and wrapped Marcus in the fiercest hug of his life. "My brilliant boy," she whispered. "My brilliant, brave boy." GM Petrosian approached them, his massive frame parting the crowd. "Mrs. Williams. Your son, he plays like old master trapped in child's body. With proper training, he could be grandmaster before he's 16. Maybe younger." "I'll make sure he gets that training," Richard said firmly. James Washington joined them, Malik at his side. "Marcus, what you did today, it matters. Every black kid who's been told chess isn't for them, every poor kid who couldn't afford lessons, every child who's been made to feel invisible, you showed them it's possible." "I just played chess," Marcus said, overwhelmed by the attention. "No," Washington said. "You did more than that. You kicked down a door that's been closed to kids like us for too long. Now it's open, and others will follow." Later, As the crowd dispersed and the venue emptied, Marcus sat with his mother in the analysis room, going over the game with GM Washington on a demonstration board. Washington pointed out improvements for both sides, moments where different moves might have changed the outcome. But the key moment, Washington said, was the rook sacrifice. That was pure inspiration. Where did it come from? Marcus thought about it. I remembered something Dad showed me once. He said sometimes the best move isn't the one that wins material or improves your position. Sometimes it's the move that asks your opponent the hardest question. The rook sacrifice asked you a question you couldn't answer perfectly with 5 minutes on your clock. Chess philosophy from a 12-year-old, Washington said, shaking his head. What's next for you, Marcus? School tomorrow, Marcus said, and everyone laughed. And after that? Marcus looked at his mother, at Richard, at the trophy sitting beside him. The national championships are in 4 months. I want to play in the championship section. That's the strongest tournament in the country, Richard warned. You'd be facing multiple GMs, some rated over 2,700. Good, Marcus said. I want to play the best. I want to become the best. As they packed up to leave, Marcus carefully placed his second-place trophy in his backpack next to the Capablanca chess set. 2 treasures now, 2 symbols of a journey that had only just begun. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Manhattan glittered under the streetlights. Marcus and Diane walked to the subway, her arm around his shoulders, his head full of chess positions and possibilities. What are you thinking about? She asked. Dad, Marcus said. Wishing he could have seen today. He did see it, baby. Through your eyes, your moves, your courage. Every time you play, he's there. As the subway carried them home, Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a chess app, already analyzing, already learning, already preparing for the next game. The boy who'd been invisible was invisible no more. The chess world knew his name now. Marcus Williams. Remember it, I. M. Mendez had said. They would. They all would. 6 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under their apartment door while Marcus was at school and Diane was at work. When Marcus came home and saw the official United States Chess Federation logo on the envelope, his hands shook as he opened it. Dear Marcus Williams, based on your exceptional performance in rated tournaments over the past 6 months, including your second-place finish at the New York State Championship and your victory at the National Junior Championships, the USCF is pleased to inform you that your official rating has been established at 2394, confirming your status as a USCF National Master, the youngest in New York State history. The letter continued, but Marcus had to sit down. National Master. At 12 years old. His phone immediately buzzed with texts from the Academy group chat. Sarah had forwarded the news from the USCF website. Within minutes, his phone was exploding with congratulations. But the second letter in the stack was even more surprising. It was from Mrs. Henderson. Marcus, I have followed your chess career with interest. Richard informs me you will be competing in the World Youth Championships in Greece this summer. Please accept the enclosed as sponsorship for your trip. Consider it an investment in American chess. Perhaps one day you will teach me to play properly. V. Henderson. The check was for $10,000. Marcus stared at it, remembering that afternoon 6 months ago when she'd laughed at him, when she tried to make him small. Now she was investing in his future. He wasn't sure if it was guilt, genuine change, or simply her rewriting history to make herself look good, but the money would change everything. When Diane came home, she found Marcus at the kitchen table with the chess board set up, playing through a game. Not one of his own, but one of his father's, the 1995 National Open game against a master, the one that should have launched William Marcus Williams's career but didn't because the chess world wasn't ready for him. Good news? She asked, seeing the letters. Marcus showed her everything, the rating confirmation, the sponsorship, the invitation to Greece. Diane sat down heavily, tears streaming down her face. We did it, Mama, Marcus said. We actually did it. No, baby, Diane said, pulling him close. You did it. You and your father's spirit and your own brilliant, brave heart. That night, Marcus dreamed of chess, but not of competitions or titles. He dreamed of his father, sitting across from him at an old wooden board, both of them moving pieces in perfect harmony, no words needed, just the eternal conversation of chess that transcends time, race, class, and even death itself. The boy who'd been laughed at for challenging a grandmaster had become a master himself. But more than that, he'd become proof that talent, determination, and courage could overcome any barrier. The game wasn't over. In chess, as in life, the game was never truly over. Dear friend, every day, in cities and towns across the world, there are children whose brilliance goes unrecognized, whose talents are dismissed because of who they are or where they come from. They're told to be invisible, to know their place, to stop dreaming of more. But talent doesn't care about zip codes. Brilliance doesn't check bank accounts. And sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you, one opportunity to show what you can do, one moment of courage to change everything. To every young person reading this who has been made to feel small, who has been told they don't belong, who has had to fight for every opportunity, keep playing. Keep learning. Keep believing. Your move might be the one that changes the game. And to everyone else, look closer. That quiet kid in the corner, that child of immigrants, that student from the wrong side of town, they might be carrying genius inside them, waiting for someone to notice, to care, to give them a board and pieces and a chance to play. Because in chess, as in life, the most beautiful games come from the most unexpected players. The board is set. The pieces are waiting. Your move. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about talent and opportunity, about courage and determination, then please, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who needs to know that their dreams are valid, their talents are real, and their time is coming. Remember, every grandmaster was once a beginner who refused to give up. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep playing, keep fighting, and keep believing in the power of your dreams.